Business is challenging no matter what stage you're at in your journey. Whether you're a business who's doing a few $100,000, a few $1 million, or $1 billion, you need your missions in check, you need your vision in check. And quite humbly today, I realized I don't have either of those two penciled down. So after recording this podcast with Murray Smith, I turned around, sat down with a notebook right here, University of Birmingham, thank you, and wrote them down. And you know what? I'm going to iterate them. And then I'm going to take Murray's test to actually figure out the real constraints within my business. If you're someone who's looking for practical, implementable guides from someone who has over 30 years of experience, watch this episode. As always, if you enjoyed this show, share it to a friend, and I really hope you take some wisdom and advice from this one. As entrepreneurs, we all experience challenges in our business journey. I'm Jay Testori, and the Grappling Growth podcast is my attempt at documenting my entrepreneurial journey while building my brands. I sit down with fellow entrepreneurs, understanding how they grapple with growth. I hope you find value and enjoy. Murray, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe.
Murray, I'm curious, what does growth look like to you?
There's, I guess, various aspects of growth. There's personal growth and there's business growth. So personal growth is certainly consistently upskilling. I deal primarily in the small to medium business owner realm, where a lot of guys have trouble upskilling. They tend to keep solving problems the same old way and don't upskill significantly and deal with precision and excellence. So personal skilling and upskilling and personal growth overflows directly into a business. So it affects our headspace, our emotional space, the impact we have on others. So the degree to which we're growing personally is totally determines the effects and impact on our business. And I find a lot of guys in the smaller to medium business realm categorize anything. If you begin to talk about emotional issues or how they need to deal with their headspace, they tend to categorize it as being, that's just for corporate people. That's just for big corporates. It's not so much for me, because they're totally operational guys. So when I say small to medium business operators, I just call them operational owners. So it's not really, I don't really work with coaches and consultants and so on, but the whole home service contractor realm, removalist companies, transport companies, manufacturing companies, packaging companies, operational guys who have teams who need to build a management structure, and a lot of them are aiming to be quite a significant business. And if they don't step up from where they perhaps initially, a lot of them are founders and started their business from scratch, and they build it by hustle. They build it by their knowledge, their experience, either in the industry or what they've picked up from maybe a boss and they've decided to start their own business. And the hustle can be the limiting factor. So if they constantly hustle rather than looking at every aspect of how to run a business, so they must look at what it means to train staff, and at what point do they want larger decisions, bigger decisions affecting the revenue production in the business to not come to them but to be made by a manager or a supervisor. So in a home service context, they might be doing major projects, large projects, perhaps for elite residential clients or large commercial clients. So when something comes up, a problem, or a client, for example, wants to extend a project, when is that pushed up to either to the owner or the senior management team in the business? And when can the on-site guy make the decision? That's just one example. But a lot of guys end up totally frazzled, working still ridiculous hours when they're $2, $3, $4, $5 million businesses, because they haven't come to grips with their own leadership skills and management skills. In probably 25 or 30 years, I can't ever remember a small to medium business owner. And by medium, well, we're talking about a company that might have 100 staff. SMBs are often viewed as being barely functioning, but that's not the case. In fact, if a founder, owner, entrepreneur can build to $10 million in the USA, that means, I think the statistics, I'm recalling this, they're in the top 0.4% of businesses. which if you look, I think there's $33.3 million, million businesses in the USA. It makes them a fairly elite group. But when they've hustled early and built and built and built, and they head up into the several $1 million revenue, it's easy for us to lose sight of the fact we've created something significant. And a lot of owners bury the issues that are deep in here or in here. So struggling with self-belief, doubt, second guessing, because they're trying to lift to a level and they're not sure what to do. They're not sure when to change. They're not sure how to train. They're not sure how to recruit. So personal growth in everything we do totally affects business. It affects our family. It affects our schedules, the number of hours we work a week. It just continues and balloons into every part of life. So, yeah.
I've never heard an answer that in depth with regards to what does growth look like to you. That's many different facets you've gone into there. Interestingly, you mentioned something, well, there are loads of key points to take out from what you said there, but what stuck out to mind is a trap that I see a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, fall into. It doesn't matter how much money you're making, we're all slaves to our business to some extent. And I think I've got loads of entrepreneurial friends, as I'm sure you've worked and you have acquaintances with hundreds over your career. Yep. But what stuck out to mind is this feeling of never enough and always being in the trenches, in the weeds. And we feel that we're building these businesses to free ourselves, but in reality, we're building these businesses to trap ourselves even further. Is that something you've seen amongst people you've worked with in a leadership capacity?
Without a doubt. In fact, if you go back 30 years to the 90s, those of us who remember it, there was a book written called The E-Myth, which is the entrepreneurial myth. So
Fantastic.
the typical, a lot of people have read it. So whether you're a chef or a plumber or an electrician or a whatever you might be, like working in a removal, the boss does brilliantly. I could easily do what he does. But they don't know all the back office stuff. They don't know everything from insurances to structuring it to leadership to everything. And they end up, a lot of guys don't get past being an owner operator, just working on their own or just having a very small team. And I actually have one experience. I was referred to a transport company that had about probably 45 staff, 25 trucks. They had a unique regional business where they delivered overnight into the regions of one of the states here. They were quite well known, but they were having trouble, and it turns out there was serious conflict between the owners, who had a 50-50 ownership, which is always a very bad structure. But
Why do you think it's a bad structure? I'm curious.
Well, there's no one had right of say. So if they were in conflict and couldn't come to a solution, it remained in conflict. In fact, one of the staff said, if we want money to repair the trucks, we have to have a passport up to the owner who looks after the finances. It was that bad.
If you're 50-50 in a company, what would you look to do to fix it?
If I was a 50-50 owner?
Yeah, looking at that problem, if I have a business partner, which I do in one venture, how do we resolve that conflict?
I think you have to both sit down and decide very, very specifically who's responsible for what and clarify it in terms of the overall business. So they had never done that. And what I was going to say in the first instance, and what you've asked speaks to this, the male owner who founded the business went through some difficulties. I think he went through a divorce and needed funding. So he had a choice of the level at which he bought an investor, a partner in. Now, they might have insisted they have 50-50. I don't know the history of that. But when I was there, and the reason I was invited, I was put on as general manager just for a period, excuse me, but they wouldn't do anything I asked. They wouldn't meet. We had a major sale contract to be negotiated with a company that we were transporting their goods. I couldn't get him to sit down and work through the issues of what offer we were going to make to them. And I'd go to find him to do something significant we were supposed to be doing to develop what I'd been asked to do. And they'd say, oh, he's gone out in the truck for the day because we were a driver short. So here we are, nearly 50 years after he'd founded the business, he was still going and jumping in the truck and doing things. So even though he had a substantial business, he was still acting as an owner-operator. He couldn't separate himself out, and they had never asked anyone to do that. So therefore, they were just in conflict all the time. There was no boundaries whatsoever. He felt he had the right because he was the founder, but she was the financial brains. So the only solution really is for two people to sit down, probably sometimes with a third party, and delineate exactly what the mission of the business is. How are you going to achieve the mission? What's the vision? So the mission is what you do. The vision is where you want to go and what you want to become. And again, mission and vision, you talk to a lot of small entrepreneurs about that, and they basically, they think that's corporate stuff. I don't need a vision, I don't need a mission, and they just roll along doing the same old thing. So it's essential that, I guess, compartmentalising and segmenting specific roles, but in the context of what the strategic plan and purpose of the business is. And they didn't have that either. They didn't have it. No one had ever talked through, were they compatible as leaders? Other managers in the business, the warehouse manager, they never met together as a team because no one had the understanding of doing that and leading a team. So it was a particularly giant mess, but that's what needs to happen. If I was going to do that with the business now, I wouldn't just do that. I'd sit them down and say, right, where are you heading? I'd take them through what they're doing in the market, what segments they should be looking at. I'd look at the values of the business. I'd look at the values of each of the owners. I'd look at the values of their customers. What's their ideal customer? I'd do a complete analysis, and they'll identify to them that they can operate much more significantly than they currently do now, so that when that decision is made or that agreement comes to where who's responsible for what, it all fits together and they both feel they're making a massive contribution to the business and there's no conflict. So they were operating both back as owner-operators in their head, and that was what the problem was. They were at loggerheads all the time as to who did what. So that's, it's a big question to answer. You could talk about it for a long time and create a whole document on it, but that's essentially the sort of thing I'd do. Yeah, and sometimes you try and work with a business and it wouldn't be resolved because someone's obstinate and won't change. That's always a risk.
How much of a game changer would it be for your business if you could learn from the same AI advisors as Tony Robbins, or the people who've been in close proximity to Dan Sullivan, famously the co-author of 10x is easier than 2x. Today's sponsor to the podcast is AI Simplify. They have put together a 30-day roadmap program to help teach you how to implement AI into your business. They've helped people save 10 to 20 hours per week, add millions of dollars in additional revenue to businesses. And for those who listen to this podcast and decide to sign up with them, you will get a complimentary AI breakthrough session with Steve French, one of the co-founders, and myself to really pencil in and figure out what we can do with your business. Now, back to the episode. If I was a small, medium-sized business owner, which I am, and I am listening to what you just said there, and you said, paraphrasing here, that small, medium-sized enterprises feel that looking at your mission and vision are exclusively reserved for corporate enterprises. Yep. If I'm listening to that right now, what would you recommend my first steps being in order to get my mission and vision in place for my business?
So the first question I'd ask, do you want to sit down and do that on your own? Or do you want to do it with someone who'll ask you confronting questions? So
confront me.
Okay. So one thing, I'll just talk about one thing I do with guys who perhaps don't know me that well or don't understand what's possible. I'll challenge them to say, take 1 hour a day, which is a lot. If you work a 10-hour day, that's 10% of your day. And some guys, as you just referred to earlier, work much longer hours. But find 1 hour a day. Do it first thing in the morning, early when you get up, if that's what you not need it operationally. block an hour out at lunchtime, do it after dinner at home, and your wife understands you're not to be interrupted. You need to be able to do some deep thinking and choose one issue or one problem or one focus, and you just work it through. Now with AI and everything, if someone learns or is instructed how to use AI really powerfully, you can instruct AI to know everything about your business. You can do brain dumps on strategy, on your past, you can talk about your doubts, your struggles, where you feel you don't have skills, etc. So I would say to move to a place of having a very clear mission and a very clear vision. There needs to be that working through of some of the factors I said before. I would look at the history of the business and the history of of you, if we're talking about you, or if it was you and a partner, the history of both of you, where that meshes together, where it doesn't, your leadership style, what flicks your switch, who's a risk taker, who's more conservative, who's the grinder that will just knock out stuff while the other one is the visionary, all those sorts of questions. And then move through into there's 5 questions I ask, which are like along the lines of what's right, what's going well that you're pretty happy with, what's wrong in terms of, just asking what's wrong is often not enough, but wrong in terms of is causing continual problems. Every time you turn around, this thing bugs you, it drives you crazy. So some very specific issues like that. And then what's confused? So every time you turn around, are our responsibilities confused? Are procedures confused? Is there a process confused? I mentioned earlier before about I didn't use the word, but delegating. Is that confused? Do managers or supervisors know what they can do and not do? And do I have a temper? Do you have a temper that's not seen in a situation like this? And then when they make a decision, there's an explosion at them, so to speak. And then I'd take them through, as I mentioned, to looking at their whole environment. So what's the environment in the industry they're in? What's happening in the industry? What's happening in the market? What opportunities are for them to step into a blue ocean where they're doing something that's totally different. And look, I sometimes I talk about these things, and as I'm talking about it and thinking it's easy to make it sound so simple, because we all struggle with our offer perhaps, or the hooks we need, or how to connect online. That's one of the biggest challenges I think we have now, because everything's so flooded. But there's always opportunities that often someone else will help you discern by asking the questions, because they can stand back and be the facilitator. Whereas if we're working it out ourselves, to step out of that and come to grips with that is not necessarily easy. Probably Alex Hormozi, who's pretty famous because of his incredible insights into business. He talks a lot about deep thinking, about taking time to specifically work through an issue. And I personally have found you can become so busy and so focused on doing things, we don't spend enough time on one issue or one problem or something that needs to be solved, and think deep enough and now do the research on it until we come to a point where I think that's the solution, and then perhaps even run it past someone else. So that's really it in a nutshell. If I was going to do it with you as a business, Joe, I'd then take you through, as I mentioned earlier, to all your marketing. What opportunities do you have? What are you doing now? What segments could you be going into? What joint ventures and partnerships could you do? And I don't impose anything. I'm the facilitator that stands back and asks the confronting questions. And then it would move on into looking at your customers. Who's your ideal customer? I don't know whether you're free to say in the podcast, but who would be a typical customer for you? Like, is there a particular industry you work with, or is there a particular category of person? Who can you give me an example without exposing anyone?
Yeah,
Not by name.
everything's published on our website. So if people want to know who we work with, they can go there. Shameless plug, bespokeagency.io.
So just give me one example.
We typically, just broadly speaking, B2B service provider, normally in the US, doing typically $1 to $10 million in revenue, quite often founder operated, wearing too many hats. They're feeling
Yeah.
as though they need to outsource and delegate functions of their business, and we try to amplify them. So quite personable, charismatic people typically.
Okay. All right. So that's the same area I work in. So you take them through a process? You mean, is that what you do, or do you personally do it, or do you have a team that does it, or that would
Uh,
talk to the owner and work things through with the owner? If they say, "Oh, look, I think you can help me. I've seen what you do. I think you're the man." What would you do with them?
so they'll typically pull us in as an agency. So externally, we'll manage and help them generate pipeline and help. So for instance, if you were our target audience and you wanted to attract more demand into your business, we would facilitate, set up the infrastructure there to do so and position you as the key person of influence. So typically it'd be a case of us managing the process and then keeping you there as the figurehead, the face of the brand.
Okay. So when you say an agency, you don't primarily mean a marketing agency. You mean broader than that.
Yeah, there's a lot of consulting in what we do, but
Right.
marketing is pretty much the foundation of everything. The
Okay.
business used to be a marketing agency up until a year and a half ago.
Okay. I guess the difference I do is I wouldn't call myself a brilliant marketer, and I certainly haven't run a marketing agency. I look at the whole business. So I think, again, I find sometimes owners, you even see different supposed gurus saying, you need a better sales process, you need this system, you need this process. And that could well be, but it's no use implementing one process. And I know you're not saying this, I'm not referring to what you do now, or one system without really understanding everything else that's happening in the business and implementing everything in I guess, a procedural and an incremental way that will, okay, this is the key issue. So out of those questions, which I didn't finish saying what the other ones are, which is what do we come up with, what's wrong, what's confused, and what's causing stress in the business, that sort of area. And then out of those, I mean, the goal is to create massive lists of everything in the business and identify as many things as possible, and then choose some key issues and prioritize them, and then ultimately create a plan out of it. So, but then I'd take them on into, like I said, identifying their ideal customer is. So one thing I find with a lot of in the home service industry, leads come to a company and often the owner still does that if he hasn't put sales guys on, and they don't qualify the leads well. So, and then they end up complaining about the quality of leads, or complaining that people ghost them and don't answer their phone, which is for all sorts of complicated reasons. Like they come from a third-party provider, and then they blame the leads, they blame maybe some of their staff, they blame the market, they blame the area, and they never come to grip because no one says to them, hey, do you think there could be a whole lot of other causes that are fairly easily solved that will launch you ahead in a whole new way? But they've never looked at them because, like I said earlier, they just revolve and head around, like you said. They carry things in their head, they're second guessing what to do, and didn't work last time, will it work again, should I try something else, but they don't know what. And the pressure it creates, and the sad thing is the impact it creates on their family. A number of guys that have said, I haven't been to my son's football match for 2 seasons or something, because they just find they get up on Saturday morning or whenever it might be and they're just swamped, they can't, and they never break out of it. It's just this revolving door of pressure. So having the courage to say, that's what I'll do. But another factor, Joe, I think is because of just what we've talked about, there's so much online, they're really nervous about who to talk to. So consultancy is a terrible word in the service-based industry. Again, they're suspicious, and they're consultants who've never run a real business, as they'd call it. They don't know what they're talking about, and unfortunately there is a lot of that. But to find someone that really understands operational, I used to be a supervisor in a tanker company running fuel. I've been on top of 1 million gallon tanks, and I mean that's just one thing of multiple things I've done. So and you've probably done stuff too, but I get it. I totally understand operational stuff. I totally understand the need for supervisors and managers to be delegated to, and in operational situations where it's hugely stressful. So part of my role with that fuel company was to work at an airport where we refueled major airlines, which you can understand is a very precise procedure. And occasionally there'd be an unannounced plane that needed to be fueled, or there was a problem under a plane. And I remember when I first started there, I didn't know. And I'm referring this to, mentioning this for a specific reason, not just waffling. But I was fairly junior, and I was new in that facility, and I decided, well, I'm not going to try and be the know-it-all. So in the upstairs area, I was a fairly young punk, I suppose. I had a tie on. None of the operators did. They were all in just the fuel company uniforms. And upstairs on the second level of the facility we were in was a giant lunchroom, and there was different companies. There was Shell and Esso and all these companies. And when I walked in, they'd all turn and look at me, you know. So I had to go up one day, and I grabbed one of the leading hands, and I said, listen, I think his name was actually Joe, I think. But I said, look, we've got this problem. I'm not sure exactly what to do. I'll support you however I can. Tell me what to do. Now, prior to that day, that guy was really sus on me. Who's this young guy? He thinks he knows everything. After that moment, we were best buddies, because all I did is have the courage and guts, and it was more out of desperation because I knew I needed to solve this problem, that I would say to him, I don't know what to do. Tell me. If I need to get on the phone, if I need whatever I need to do, I'll do it. You're the boss, okay? And it worked brilliantly. And that taught me, out of my desperation of not looking bad to my boss, that I say to owners now, do you ever get your team together and say to them, what do I do that causes you problems? Because our insecurity causes, I've observed over and over again, any leader, if they're insecure in here or have had serious hurts in their life, even as a child, and I'm not trying to get all psychological, that creates self-protection. That's a lot of control freaks, and I guess we're all control freaks of our own business to a degree, but they won't open themselves up, and they cause problems because they're always directing or even manipulating or bullying, which is the worst case scenario. So a powerful thing, and having the courage to pull your team together and do it regularly, and probably do it with a barbecue or a meal or whatever's appropriate. So what do I do that stops you, irritates you, drives you crazy, creates friction in the business, wastes money, whatever. And the challenge is you ask the question and then you shut up. You just go quiet. Silence is very powerful. So when they say something and you go, ooh, you don't react and then fill the space with waffle and firing back at them. You just let them talk, and perhaps drop in another question and say to another guy, well, what do you think, you know? And if we have the courage to do that with an operational team who perhaps an owner's never done that before, it's one of the most liberating, powerful things, and will create the leadership. So they don't have to study leadership, and a guy doesn't have to. They'll learn real fast that by being a leader, just by having the courage to be transparent, they immediately become the leader, because very few staff or employees have ever experienced that. It's a liberating, powerful thing to do. It takes courage, because you don't know what's going to come back at you, even particularly if you might have a problem employee in the company. But it's a really significant thing to do, because it just then they will begin to come to you with suggestions because they know you're open. It's easy to say to a team, look, I've got an open door, so to speak. You come and talk to me about anything. But if they do it in the past and we've pushed it away or ignored it, that blocks it out. It stops innovation happening in the business. And that's something very few small to medium businesses really do. They don't think enough about how do we innovate continually in every area of what we do. And they don't sit down and talk about it. The owner often feels like, I've got to do it all. I've got to come up with the solutions. I've got to come up with the answers. But really, some of the answers are in our crew, and we never ask.
How much of a game changer would it be for your business if you could learn from the same AI advisors as Tony Robbins, or the people who've been in close proximity to Dan Sullivan, famously the co-author of 10x is easier than 2x? Today's sponsor to the podcast is AI Simplifier. They have put together a 30-day roadmap program to help teach you how to implement AI into your business. They've helped people save 10 to 20 hours per week, add millions of dollars in additional revenue to businesses. And for those who listen to this podcast and decide to sign up with them, you will get a complimentary AI breakthrough session with Steve French, one of the co-founders, and myself to really pencil in and figure out what we can do with your business. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, the inner citadel is often looking within to actually find those answers, as opposed to externally always looking at other factors, externalities, things out of our control to look at those solutions. Murray, thank you for your time. Where can people find you and what's next for you?
People can find me on LinkedIn. I believe I'm giving you a link for that. I've got a couple of websites for different products we do, which one is called totallyunstuck.com. You can go to totallyunstuck.com, and really talks about where an owner's stuck. It's a very simple start. It's a free 30-minute AI interview, and it's quite incisive. It's a bit confronting, and it's designed to address leadership issues, and there's totally no obligation. It's free. Guys can go on and spend 30 minutes being interviewed, and it's not an app we bought. We developed it. It's intuitive, and we'll talk to you as an owner and treat you with respect. And if you push back, it'll apologise. It's quite a good experience, and might open up some things for you that you hadn't thought about. So yeah, that's two ways people can connect.
Lovely. All right, appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I've enjoyed it.